Same deal as the first meeting. No say on the content, no say on how it gets run. Okay, so we do that. Oh, from there, we're gonna actually go to a third meeting. Same deal as the first two meetings. You do have a group project in this, and I'm assigning groups, and it's graded, right? You gotta do that. We're gonna go to another, by now you're like pretty tired of these 20 people in your meeting, right? You go to a fourth meeting, we give you lunch, and then you have 3 more meetings. Okay, right? That's the school day. And you're like, okay, I wouldn't do that, right? Okay, well here's the thing. You come back tomorrow, you have all the same meetings, right? That's actually school, right? Oh no, wait. Come back for 9 months straight, you have all the same meetings. Right? Okay, that's school. And here's the thing. Your girls are awesome through this. They go from meeting to group project to meeting, and they pay attention, and they don't punch anyone, and they totally hold it together over the course of the entire day. And in the day, in those meetings, stuff happens that is hard for them, right? That they're sitting in class and they're like, oh my God, that girl's picking her nose, but I'm not gonna say anything, right? And they just take that, and this is emotional trash. They take that emotional trash and they jam it in their pocket, and they just sit there and they're awesome at school. You know, and then they get to their fourth meeting and there's a pop quiz and they really aren't ready and they're kind of panicking, but they don't fall apart in class and they manage, but they're sort of freaking out, and then they jam that emotional trash in their pocket. Right? And then, through the course of the day, various pieces of emotional trash get jammed in their pocket while they hold themselves together like superheroes here. Okay, so then they come home, right? And we go, how was school? Right? And they're like, rah, right? And out comes the trash. Okay, there is nothing wrong with this system so long as you understand that you are a garbage collector. Right? Like, I really mean that. So the how was school is you getting out your emotional trash bag and just letting them chuck all the junk in. This is how it works. This is all they need. They don't want to talk about the trash. They don't want you to ask them why they picked that trash up, right? They don't want you to call someone and be like, yeah, my daughter mentioned this, and then it shows up in school and she's like, why is my trash here? Like, I took that home, right? I mean, they just want you to make it go away, right? So if you're dying, and I know this isn't untangled, you can say, do you want my help or do you just need to vent? Right? If you are dying, you can ask that. But here is something I picked up on the road since the book came out. So I was in Princeton, New Jersey, and I was talking with a bunch of upper school girls. And I said, I'm going to talk to your parents tonight. Is there anything you want me to pass along? This earnest 9th grader, she's like, yeah, I got something. And she said, could you please, and she didn't know I was going to talk about complaining, could you tell them that at the end of the day, when I tell them about my day, the only thing I want them to say back to me is, oh my God, that sucks. She's like, that's all I want to hear. That's all I want to hear. I was like, you got it. And it works really well. It works extremely well. Okay, so then moving on to contending with adult authority. I will tell you, this is actually my favorite chapter in the book. A lot of what gets written about adolescence treats the topics I treat in Untangled. I don't feel like there's a lot about what other people call adolescent rebellion. Like, I think we just sort of treat it as like this nasty side effect of adolescence, where I'm like, no, this is actually really interesting stuff and it's really important. And this is where they start to see us as whole and human and flawed, which we are, right? And they start to tell us about how whole and human and flawed we really are. So I have a couple thoughts on this. For you guys, this isn't the most fun part of being a parent, right? Like, the word hypocrite is in my house constantly. And it's always leveled at me, right? I mean, like, you're such a hypocrite, right? Like, and, well, yeah, I am. I know, I totally am, right? Like, I own that, and we roll with it. But what I've come to appreciate more is, if you are parenting a teenager, if you don't have a good sense of humor about yourself, you have to get one. Like, you absolutely have to get one. You will not have a working relationship with your teenager if you cannot tolerate making fun of yourself or being poked at. Like, you have to find a way. The other thing I will say is, if you don't have a way to feel loved and worthy and wanted in the world, besides your relationship with your teenager, you have to get that too, right? You absolutely have to get that too. Like, your sense of goodness and value cannot ride on how your adolescent daughter treats you, right? You need a job you love, you need volunteer work you love, you need a garden you love, you need knitting projects that love you back. I mean, you need all of these things because it's not going to be your kid, and it's not her job. It's not her job, but it's hard on us. The other thing I want to say in this chapter is that thinking back, that there's a scene I described in Untangled of my situation with my 10th grade trigonometry teacher. I call him in the book, I call him Mr. Martin, which was not his real name. And I did not like him at all. We had what we would say in school words, a bad fit, me and Mr. Alleged Martin. And it's funny, like, this is like 30 years ago, and I'm still sort of bitter about it, and like, I want to tell you his real name, but like, that would be really unprofessional. So I'm not going to do that, unless you ask me at the after party. He had a really funny last name, too. Like, of course, I give him this really bland last name, but in real life, I'll tell you. Because you'll crack up. Okay, so anyway, so the story in the book is, and this is a true story, so I just couldn't stand the guy. So I was complaining constantly about him. So I come home and be like, oh, I hate Mr. Martin, he like doesn't correct our stuff in, fast, and doesn't get it back to us, and can't stand Mr. Martin, he makes no sense in class, and can't stand Mr. Martin, he doesn't give us tests on the stuff he says his tests are going to be about. And my mom was pretty patient with it. But my mom also, like, she's a mom, right? And she's also pretty tough in her own really fabulous way. And so there was a point where she said to me, look, there will be no place on your high school transcript to write, I did not like Mr. Martin, right? Go figure it out. And thinking more about that story since the book came out, there's a few things I want to add to that. So one is, there were two really smart things my mom did in that moment. And like, let me just be clear. I wasn't like, oh, good point, Mom, right? I'm sure I was like, rah, rah, rah. But one smart thing she didn't disagree with me about him. Like, what would be the profit of that? Like, I wasn't going to change my mind, So she said, yeah, okay, I believe you. Right, okay, so he stinks, right? Okay, that's your deal. And then she said, go handle it, right? She moved me to that next step. And one of the things I'm thinking about a lot these days is that if you are an adolescent, the world looks like it has only two categories, which is stuff I like and stuff that's a crisis. Right? That's what it feels like to be 14, right? Okay. And if you are in close, loving touch with an adolescent, you can get caught up in that view of the world, right? Like, there's the teachers you like, and then there's the crisis of Mr. Martin, right? And what my mom did, and what we need to do, is she was like, oh, I have such good news for you. There's this giant in-between category of stuff you can handle, right? And actually, most of life is in this giant category. So there's stuff you like, say it's your biology teacher. There's a crisis, right? Like, say a coach who is cruel and unfair, and an adult needs to step in, right? Those crises do occur. And then there's all the rest, which is the stuff you can handle. And this is what I'm thinking about more and more as we are stressed about stress, right? No, stress is in that category most of the time. Traumatic stress is over here. Unrecoverable stress is over here. Kids who never get enough sleep, so they're never able to manage. Everything else is in this department, right? And then Netflix is in but this is where we mostly live. And we can't be scared of this category, and we have to lovingly introduce kids to this big, fat category. And that really takes it down many helpful notches. Okay, so then thinking about planning for the future, along these same lines. So I have this kind of like ill-formed or partially formed metaphor about what it feels like to send a daughter through high school, and especially when under extraordinary conditions where we have so many options and so much good stuff we can offer. What I worry about is that we're developing in our minds, without talking about it sometimes, what I'm going to call the ballistics model, which is, you get the coordinates for the launch, right? And they've got to be just so, it's kind of like Angry Birds, Like, they've got to be just so, she's got to be pointed in this particular direction at this particular angle, because we have this I think, really wrong idea. That graduation is when we launch her, right? We should, right, out of this. Okay, with that wrong idea in mind, we get really nervous about the coordinates. Like, really nervous about the coordinates. Like, wait, she failed that quiz? Oh, golly, that launch thing, it just went down an angle, right? She was going to Harvard, now she's going to, Colorado State. Like, that's like really bad, right? Like, we have this idea that like the ballistics are getting messed up day by day by day, or improved day by day by day. But there's all of this tension because we have this feeling of like, there will be this moment when the ballistics are set and nothing changes, right? Or there will be these moments when the ballistics are ruined and it cannot be undone. Okay, that creates way more difficulty than is necessary. And we have to go back to some idea of a pathway model, right? Which is your daughter and us and every other human bumps along on a path. And she bumps this way for a while, and she bumps that way for a while, and she bumps over here, and she's picking up experience, and she's learning and growing, and she will bump along for the rest of her life. And this is just how it goes. So the messed up quiz is not a loss of the angle on the trajectory. It's like, oh, that was your like bump of the day, right? Where are you going to bump into next, right? Like, this is how we have to see it. And I have worked really hard to be, when I'm with adolescent girls these days, I go out of my way to talk with them about my work as a writer because I'm known now for this. And I write monthly for the Times, and I got my, my book and whatever. So I'm like, okay, that's where I am right now in my career. And what I say to them is, and this is true, when I was in high school, I was a terrible writer. I was a really poor writer. I grew up in Denver, actually, and I went to our big inner city high school that I was bused to, and I had an awesome experience and learned a lot, nothing about school. Right, like I did not get a good education in the traditional sense. I went to college. I managed to get myself into Yale somehow, at which point the poverty of my high school education became very, very apparent to me. I was terribly behind when I got there. I spent freshman, sophomore, junior year in office hours with my English professors. I didn't even understand what they wanted me to do. It wasn't like I was like moving along. I didn't even understand the expectation. I sought a lot of help in my writing as a college student. I went to graduate school in psychology, which does nothing for you as a writer, right? It does nothing. Like, all we do is write these very technical papers entirely in the passive voice. Like, it doesn't improve one's writing. I say all this stuff to the girls. I say, I did take English classes as a graduate student because you could kind of tack on extra things. And one of my friends from college was a law student at Michigan. And I remember taking a paper of mine that I'd written for an English class to him, and I was like, Kevin, would you look at this? And I knew he was a brilliant writer. And he said it in the nicest way. He goes, wow, you're a really bad writer. And I'm like, I know, I really struggle. And I was 26 at that point. Okay, and then the story improves. I started writing, thank God, right? My dearest friend and I started writing a book together. She happens to be an English professor. We wrote 3 editions of that book about college teaching. My writing got a lot better because I imitated her and she edited me. We did that book 3 times. Because of that book, a colleague in the psych department said, hey, do you want to write a book in an abnormal psychology textbook? And I was like, okay, sure, without really appreciating what I had signed up for. And what I had signed up for is that my half of the book was 800 pages long, right? And by that time, actually, I was the stronger of us in terms of writing, so I wrote mine and I edited his. And then we did that book twice. Okay, so that gets me to 35, 36. I was a way better writer, right? 5 books later, thousands of papers and pages later, I was a much better writer. Okay, that was me at 36. That's when I started writing in a popular vein. That was 10 years ago. So this idea of like the ballistics, right? My ballistics as a writer coming out of high school, I would have been 20 feet in the ground, right? That's not how this works. And if we can remember that, and if we can remind girls about that, we do them a huge favor, an absolutely huge favor. Okay. Let me talk to you about my thinking about entering the romantic world. This has evolved too. Don't worry, it's going to be all right. It's going to be all right. It's every parent's least favorite chapter. They're like, I'm going to skip this. Here's what I'm going to say about this. I feel really dedicated to the model I start to articulate in Untangled, that when we talk with girls about their romantic lives, the first thing we say is, you must start with thinking about what you want, like what you want to have happen. You know, the standard conversation we have with girls about their romantic lives is, okay, don't get pregnant, you know, don't get an STD, you know, don't get yourself in a bad position, right? Some people say this, I don't say this, you know, don't harm your reputation, right? So it's like the 4 don'ts, and then we're like, okay, go have fun, right? Like, that's the sex talk with girls. When we look at the research, that's what gets said. Interestingly, when we look at the research on boys, the conversation is, if you're gonna have sex, wear a condom. Like, that's the conversation. So I've been thinking more about this, right? Okay, so there's a whole lot of problems in this. When I think more deeply about this don't, I think what we're often trying to say to girls is, please don't have sex, right? And then I think when we scrape that away, I think under that we're saying, we're gonna ask you to regulate adolescent sexuality because we're not gonna ask the boys, right? So, okay, none of this feels okay. None of this feels okay. So I have moved back into this idea of like, let's have one conversation that we could have with boys and girls. And that conversation should be, when you think about beginning the physical side of your romantic life, whether it's hand-holding, whether it's something way past hand-holding, whether it was 6 months ago, whether it's upon marriage, like I don't care when, right? There are 4 things you think about, and you think about them in this order. First, what do you want? What do you want? This is such a strange thing for girls to hear from adults. I have said this to groups of girls, and I've had girls say to me, no adult has ever said that to me, right? So thinking back to what you said, Elizabeth, about like the inoculating force of places like this, we do this here, we can do this here. So what do you want? Then the second question is, what does your partner want, right? And then like that requires communication. Like you have to have some form of communication to articulate this to one another. The third point, and this is a place where my thinking has really changed. At this point, we usually use the word consent. I will not use that word anymore. I have no problem with the idea behind it. I have a huge problem with the word consent. It is baked into the offense-defense frame of romance. And in that frame, boys are on offense, girls are on defense. That is the wrong frame. We should not use language that carries over from that frame. Consent means to give permission, just to allow something, right? To give in to something, right? We give in to root canals, right? We consent to those. Like that makes sense to me. I worry that in trying to make it right, we're actually still using the language that carries over from an idea we don't want to have. So I say to them now, there's what you want, there's what your partner wants, and there's what you are both enthusiastically agreeing to. Right? Enthusiastic agreement is where we want to be. And then the last question is, are there risks in what we're enthusiastically agreeing to? You know, could someone get pregnant? Could someone get their heart broken? Could someone get an STD? You know, and then we manage those risks. When we look at cultures that frame it in this way, that put want and desire at the center, and everything flows from that, and by cultures here, I mean basically only the Dutch. Like, everybody else is super weird about it. Like, they get it. It's true. When we look at those cultures, what we see is that their teenagers have the best sexual health in the industrialized world. Their teenagers are not having more sex. They are not having earlier sex. They have fewer partners than we have, our teenagers are having. When they do have sex, it's happier. They have the lowest rates of unwanted pregnancies in the industrialized world. We have the highest rates of unwanted adolescent pregnancies in the industrialized world. They have the lowest rates of STDs. We have the highest rates of STDs. When we are giving girls the very strong impression that they do not have a right to be there, right? That's what all that don't is like, we don't want you there. We just don't want you there. When we give them that impression, they do not take good care of themselves when they are there because they don't feel like they belong there. And I'll tell you a good example of how this becomes so atmospheric we can miss it sometimes. So we have these fabulous girls at Laurel School where I get to spend 2 days a week, and I was talking with the 9th graders about drinking, parties, stuff like that. And one of our girls said, and you can totally imagine, like they're so well trained and they're so bright. One of my 9th graders said, well, you know, also drinking, it makes murky questions of consent. Okay, well, she's right? Like, she's gotten the memo on all of this. And I said, okay, that's true, but like, back up here. All right, there's not a whole lot in life that we do for pure pleasure, right? There's not a whole lot. There's like Netflix, right? You can tell what my priorities are. Ben and Jerry's, which has now come up for the second time in this talk, and making out, right? That's sort of my big, like what else is there, right? There are these three things, okay. Why would you be drunk for any of these, right? Why would you blunt that experience, right? If somebody was like, hey, do you want some Ben and Jerry's? You're not gonna be like, oh, I gotta get drunk first, right? Like, no, like you should just wholeheartedly enjoy that. So I'm like, you guys, why would you be drunk to make out with somebody, right? Like you should enjoy it. This should be total pleasure for you. There's no reason for you to be there if it's not for your own pleasure. Right? Again, I will tell you, when I talk to girls like this, they're like, you are the weirdest grown-up. We're not disagreeing with you, but like we just don't even know what to make of you, right? Because it is so far from the cultural discourse about this. And yet, like, so obviously, the only way we should be doing this. Like, it's so striking to me in that way. And so I say, if you feel like you need to be drunk to make out with somebody or high to make out with somebody, like, you need to examine that, right? What's going on that you're finding yourself feeling that way? Okay. So then, chapter 7, caring for herself, right? This is the thing that we have to help her build. And help her build and own and feel completely responsible for by the time it's ready for her to go out into the world. And so in this chapter, I talk about sort of the more risky stuff that comes in late adolescence. But what I will say is the work on getting girls to care for themselves starts when they are 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old. At every point in development, we can and should talk about choices kids make in terms of self-care, right? That our job is to raise girls who feel fully responsible for this. So, if you happen to be a parent of a 4th grader, right, who's not here yet, and she only likes to eat beige foods, right, which, that happens, you can say to her, like, hey, you need to throw some green on your plate in order to take better care of yourself, right? Not, I'm making you do this, or I'm asking you to do this, or do this because I'm supervising you right now. If you're taking care of, got a 5th or 6th grade daughter who is only eating celery or cucumbers or stuff like that, you can say, hey, you need to throw more nutrition on this plate in order to take better care of yourself, right? If you have a kid who is sneaking her phone into her room at night and coming out bleary-eyed because she's up with it all night, on plenty of tired days you could be like, give me your phone, right? On other days you can say, wait, you're not taking good care of yourself. That phone is getting in the way of your good self-care. What are we going to do so that you're able to get the sleep your body deserves, right? It is about self-care, what she deserves, how she manages that. Questions about social media and how much kids should be using it and how they should be using it, like these are always tricky. I'm interested in always framing them under self-care, right? Social media can be a great form of self-care. There's a lot of loving, fun, supportive stuff that goes on social media. It also can then turn into a poor form of self-care, right? That they are spending too much time on it and it gets in the way of other things, or it makes them unduly upset, or it interferes with their sleep. So how we talk and think about their lives on social media should be and can be under the umbrella of self-care, right? And then we do start to move it up into the stuff where the stakes feel really pretty high, right? How they think about drinking when they have access to it, how they think about substances when they have access to it, driving, their romantic lives, all of that can become concerning. And here, if you have laid this groundwork around it is the care of yourself, you are responsible for your care of yourself, I'm here to help, that groundwork sets you up for really kind of the big leagues of high school options. Whoops. I love that half door. It's like, a kid crawled out of there earlier. It was awesome. And so I have the privilege of talking with the girls at Laurel School about the big league stuff. I get to talk with them about driving, drinking, sex, substances. And my stance on this is always and everywhere around them taking good care of themselves. And I will tell you, I've gotten pretty blunt about it these days with them. And I say things like, you're not going to get caught, right? The chances of you getting caught are really low, right? Whether you're drinking or smoking or, driving crazy. Like, the chances that a cop is standing right there when you're doing that or that your parents are going to know are actually vanishingly small. And I say to them, do not worry about whether or not you're going to get caught. focus only on whether you could get hurt. And I say that over and over and over again. And then because I have been there at Laurel long enough that I probably say things I shouldn't, I also say, look, I don't care if you get arrested. I don't care if you get arrested. Like, it's not good for you to get arrested, but here's the way I size it up. By the time you are in the back of a police car, you are safe. That's all I care about. That is all I care about. So take any opportunity, any angle to go at this from the side of safety, not getting hurt. Of course there are legal implications. I'm not naive about those. I think we should talk about those, but having that be the game, right, that's not the right game. I think that our job is that we want to turn girls out into the world who assess things entirely in terms of, could I be harmed? Could something go wrong? If no adult anywhere ever knows about this, would this still be a good move for me to make? And I think if you feel ready, I think you can even say things to your kid like, if I know you are perfectly safe, you can do anything you want, right? Because that is actually pretty much what it comes down to. Like when we're saying you can't go to that kid's house, right? It's not that you don't like that kid, it's that it doesn't feel safe, right? And so here's where I'll start to wrap us up. Like, so one of those sort of weird ways my mind works is I think, like, wouldn't it be kind of funny if we actually did, but like no one's gonna do it, but if you do it, like, tell me. Like put a neon sign in our kitchens that said safety, right? And like had like a nearby switch. And so when your daughter's like, really, why can't I have 3 extra kids in the car for 2 miles? You're like, oh, safety, right? Yeah, law is schmaz, you're probably not gonna get caught. I mean, it's not good if you do, but it's a safety question, right? And then, of course, the big one, well, why can't I smoke pot? It's really complicated, right? The laws make it complicated. Oh, safety, right? It turns out it's really unsafe for adolescents. Like, we know that your brains take it much harder than everybody else's. It's not a safe choice, right? It's just not a safe choice. Why can't I go over to that kid's house where everything goes crazy all the time? Oh, safety, right? Like, I know it's really fun over there, but your safety is the only thing that matters to me. So until I know you're safe, that's not gonna happen. So that is your neutral third party. That is the only thing that matters. That's the only thing that ever matters. And I think every opportunity you get to point to that big flashing neon sign as the governor of these decisions, take that opportunity. So I'm going to wrap up here. Let me just say this. I newly appreciate how isolating it can be to raise a teenager, right? Like when your kids are younger, you know how like when they're 3 and 4, like you stand around on the playground and you like talk about like, are you guys doing okay with potty training? Or like, is your kid insane in the middle of the night? You have those conversations. You can do that. And then when they get to be teenagers, they're like challenging in all new ways. And yet, out of respect for their privacy, right, maybe some shame on our parts, we just stop talking about the super weird stuff that's happening in our houses. And I think there's a lot more worrying. Like, is this all right? Am I okay? Is my kid okay? And so, like, weirdly, I feel like so grateful when we come together in large numbers to just talk about how hard this is, right? And how strange they are, and how muddled we feel. Because, I'm just gonna go back to what Anna Freud said, right? Like, this is how it is, and so parents deserve support. So I'll wrap up there. You're welcome.
Wow, thank you so much for coming. That was unbelievable. It is, and we will continue talking about how hard it is and all the fun things we go through as parents at Miss Pav's after party right over in the Rose Room. If those of you that can stay, please come over. I want to thank all of you for coming out and joining us at the APA meeting this morning to hear Dr. Lisa Damour. Let's give her another round of applause. Have a happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Those that want to come over, that can hang around, come to the after party in the Rose Room. It's going to be great. Thanks.